We are officially in December, which means it's time to decorate for Christmas. And because I had a new addition to my family this year, I needed to add a stocking to my collection. I made my first set of stockings from a very simple pattern that I found online back when it was just my husband and I, pre-kids, and it was in very bright red, green, super like neon colors that were really in Christmas decor circa 2014 when I made them. In 2021, I decided it was time for a refresh, and I bought far too much fabric from Hawthorne Supply Company and started making stockings. I used a very simple pattern from Suzy Quilt's website, and I'm going to walk you through how to actually go about making these stockings in this video. First, gather your fabric. You'll need 3 types of fabric for the stocking, 2 main colors and an accent color. The fabrics that I use for all of my stockings are from the Moda Hustle and Bustle collection, and all of the measurements and details are available on the Suzy Quilt's website, which I've linked to below. I'll be matching the stockings that I made previously, replacing the green holly print with the green line print. The first thing I'm going to cut is the white fabric for the accent on the outside of the stocking, and that is 4 3.5-inch squares. The next fabric that I'm cutting is the dark green, and I need actually 3 different shapes. I need 2 4.5-inch squares, which are the bottom bits. I need 1 5.25 by 7-inch rectangle and 1 4 3/4 by 8.25-inch rectangle. So kind of odd shapes. So the widest cut that I need is less than 9 inches, and this is 9 inches. So I'm going to start by taking that cut. So it's 4 3/4 of an inch. And then I'll trim this down to 8.5. My next cut is 5.25 by 7 inches. And last but not least, I need 2 4.5-inch squares. And I think that's why this remnant is this long, is because I used that for the stocking. So it's 9 inches, so I can cut 4.5 inches and then get 2. The striped piece of fabric is going to be the contrast here, as well as the back. So I am going to cut enough fabric so that I actually can get the back out of it. I don't have to cut multiple times. So I have my template. I made this last year. And I'm just going to cut a little bit of extra. So half of this is definitely plenty for the back. So I'm just going to give it a trim on the fold. So one of these will be my back. And then this one I'm going to cut for my front pieces. So I need 4 different cuts for this fabric. I need 1 5.25 by 7-inch, 1 4 3/4 by 8.25, 1 4.5-inch square, and then 1 4 3/4 by 8-inch. We're going to do an 8.5-inch cut from this edge, and then we'll subcut that. Then we'll just square up this side because I have no idea how straight this is. So we need 4 3/4. So there's our 4 3/4 by 8.5. Five 1/4 by 7. That's not straight. 4.5. by 4.5. Okay, so we have all of our front pieces cut now. Now I'm going to mark a diagonal on all of my 3.5 inch squares using my air erasable pen. This is a pen by Clover. Now it's time to lay out our pieces. So our slightly thinner and longer pieces are at the bottom. Our slightly chubbier pieces are at the top. And each of these will go here. Okay, to the sewing machine. Okay, I have sewn straight down this line on each of these pieces. Either using your rotary cutter, or I just prefer to use a pair of scissors. I'm just gonna snip off the excess. Trying to keep about 1/4 inch there. In theory, you could stitch another line like 1/2 inch away from this and then use this as a bonus project for your half square triangles. I just don't really feel like doing that tonight. Next thing that I'm going to do is I will press these seams. In the pattern, they have you pressing the seams open. Okay, let's put these back together. Instead of sewing this all together quite yet, we're going to put on the side piece. So here's our center of our stocking. We're going to put this piece on. So that's our last remaining rectangle. We're going to put the right sides together like this. We'll draw a line on that corner. You can either draw it with your erasable ink, or you can just press in that seam. Okay, and here we go. Back to the machine to sew that.
While I was at my machine, I went ahead and sewed together my 3 squares as well. Stripe, pane, and stripe was the order for my stocking.
Okay, now it's time to assemble the block. So this seam should match and these seams should match. So this should be pretty quick to pull together. So the next thing I need to do is cut this out. You probably can't tell, but I did punch. Let's see if you can see that. So I'm not sure how easily you can see this, but I did punch tiny little holes at the corners of the template where the diamond is supposed to end. So there's one here, and in the center. So I can actually align these pretty well with the stocking. So now all I need is a batting scrap, and then I will cut this out.
Once that's cut, baste the layers together for quilting. I prefer to pin baste, so that's what I did here.
Don't forget, when you cut out the back, you gotta do the reverse.
Since the back is also quilted, make sure you baste this as well. Using the same template and a double layer of fabric, cut out the lining. The lining is quite simple to sew together. Right sides together, sew around the stocking with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Leave the top completely and totally open, and importantly, a 5 or 6 inch gap at the bottom of the stocking. This is where you're going to turn the stocking right side out later, so make sure you do not skip this step. Backstitch wherever you start and stop sewing on this lining. Next, it's time for quilting. I did a very simple pattern of quilting for my stockings, just straight lines an inch apart, but you can get as creative as you want. If you are planning straight lines, be sure you have a walking foot to keep everything nice and even.
So something I'm going to do is I'm going to sew my loop. I took one of my fabric scrap remnants. I cut it down to 2 inches. I think it's about 7 or 8 inches long. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it over, just seam about 1/4 of an inch away. Then I will turn it inside out and use it as my hanging.
The way that I like to turn loops like this right side out is by pinning the very top of one side of the loop with a safety pin and then sliding that safety pin through the channel. You may need to work it a little bit, but it turns out very nice. Make sure that you give the loop a good press after turning it right side out. Now that our front and back outsides are quilted and our loop is done, bring your front and back pieces together to the sewing machine. Similar to how you sewed together the lining fabric, sew together your outer stocking pieces with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This time though, the only gap that you need to leave is at the top. After you're done, flip the outer part of the stocking right side out and stuff it into your lining, which still has the right sides in. You can pin or use sewing clips like I did to attach the lining pieces and outer pieces. This is the step where we attach the lining to the outside. I aligned the seams before adding my loop, which faced down into the sandwich of the fabric.
So this is why we left that hole, because when we're done, what we're going to do is we're going to pull it through and then flip it right side out through this hole. So it's really important that that hole gets left.
I took my extension table off of my machine to sew the lining and outsides together, and I backstitched several times over the loop to reinforce it. Now flip the stocking right sides out through the hole left in the bottom of the lining.
Okay, 2 steps left. So I have to sew this closed. You can hand sew it, but for me and my purposes, I'm totally fine with just machine top stitching a little bit there. Flip it inside in. And then what I did on my previous stockings was I just had a nice layer of stitching on top here so that everything stayed together as it should. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that.
Top stitching holds the stocking together and the lining in place. I stitched about a ½ inch away from the edge. Make sure that you backstitch this and start on the back so that back stitching doesn't show up on the front of your stocking.
I think it turned out so lovely. I'm so happy that my son now has a stocking to match the rest of ours, and that we're really able to kick off the holiday season now.